Today we are going to discuss about social and academic conditions during the period of Ishwakus and Vishnukundins. In the previous class, we had examined the political history, the origin and the extent and the expansionist policy of the Vishnukundins and the Ikshvakus. After having established their independent kingdoms in South India, and gaining some kind of a political stability, the Ikshvakus and the Vishnukundins were successful in contributing to the shaping of social and economic conditions in South India. Apart from Satavahanas, the Vishnukundins and the Ikshvakus have contributed to the social and economic conditions during their respective periods. I have put down all the points as bullet points, and I will be sliding down some slides based on which I will try to explain the social and economic conditions during the period of Ikshvakus and Vishnukundins. The next slide that I'm going to show you is 1 minute. Slide in which I have around about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullet points. These bullet points explain to you the kind of influences that were there in the development of Ikshvaku's art and architecture. The first point that I am referring to is the Ikshvakus are known for their dual affinities in terms of reflected in their art. Here, dual beliefs are the beliefs of Brahmanism and the beliefs of Buddhism. So the art and architectural contribution of the Ikshvakus very clearly explains that the Ikshvakus had patronized both religious practices. That is, they practiced the Hindu art and architecture. At the same time, they also had practiced the Buddhist architecture. And in some cases, we can also find some kind of a reciprocal influences of both arts. So the affinities here refers to a kind of a religious faith. They had faith in both Hinduism and Buddhism. And this fact can be corroborated or it can be established by the different, inscriptions which stand today and which give us an idea of the fact that the Ikshvaku art and architecture had the influence of both Hinduism and Buddhism. For example, if you take the inscriptions records facts such as donations for the construction of chaityas and viharas at Bhattiprodu. Chaityas and viharas are a part of Buddhist art and architecture. So at Bhattiprodu, at Jagaipeta, we find chaityas and viharas, and at the same time, temples were built during this particular period, which points out to the fact that they believed in both Buddhism and Brahmanism. Here, Brahmanism refers to the idea of Hinduism as it was brought down from the times of the Vedic times. From the inscriptions of Jagayapeta, Kottammapargu, and Nagarjunakonda, it seems that most of the Ikshvaku women were coming from royal families and were patrons of Buddhism. And since they mostly funded Buddhist construction. This clearly shows that the rulers of the Ikshvaku dynasty were completely tolerant, where the kings sometimes had patronized Brahmanism or Hinduism, and the queens, on the other hand, had patronized Buddhism. And while the kings were patronizing or giving grants to the construction of the temple, the queens were giving grants to the construction of Buddhist viharas, chaityas, or other forms of Buddhist symbols. So this clearly establishes the kind of tolerance that was there for individual practice of faith and religious belief. So this reflects a high level of maturity at a very ancient period in ancient India. So This is a very important point that there was a kind of a toleration. The society was highly mature, and it had given importance to individual religious beliefs and faiths. Okay, so the inscriptions at Jagayapeta, Kotampadu, and Nagarjunakonda, they just speak of this kind of fact that was there during the period of the Ikshvaku dynasty. Their reign, the reign of Ikshvakus, marks the cultural and religious growth and developments of Krishna and Guntur region. As Vijaypuri or Nagarjunakonda, that is the exact borderline between present-day Nalgonda and Guntur district. And you have the Krishna river flowing from Nagarjunakonda down to, through the Guntur district, down to Amravati, and enters the sea henceforth. So you have the development of small towns and townships all along the length of the Krishna river, and that is one of the reasons you have the districts of Krishna and Guntur having cultural and religious symbols of Buddhism and Brahmanism, which speak of the times of Ikshvakus very clearly. So this speaks of the growth of not only small kind of a little level of urbanization along the length of the Krishna river, but it also speaks of the development, the cultural development during the period of Ikshvakus from the Krishna river, starting from Nagarjunakonda down to Amravati. So when we take the next point and try to understand, the architectural splendor of the Ikshvakus manifests in the Mahachaityas and Viharas and the richly ornate temples, particularly at the site called Nagarjunakonda, prove that they patronize both Vedic and Buddhist faiths. Okay, the same point, it has been reiterated. The architectural splendor. See, here when I use the word richly ornate, it means intricate designs of leaves, designs of, particular details when you're making, depicting a god, or when you're making a Buddha figure, or when you're making the figure of a Shiva. The particular details, that they are very important. And this makes the art and architecture rich. It is not just craving out something out of a rock, but giving importance to details of a sculpture speaks the growth of the richness of the art and architecture. So whether you look at the temples, or when you look at the Buddhist chaityas or viharas, here you find intricate, very complicated designs coming out, or complicated art coming out very delicately on rock. So this is a kind of a growth that you can find during this. It's a splendor, it's a visual splendor, and we can find this from the times of Ikshvakus and Vishnu Kundins in South India from this particular period onwards. The next slide that I'm trying to show you is, it gives you certain more details about the sculptures of the Ikshvakus, and these sculptures are categorized under the declining phase of a glorious art tradition that started with Amaravati and Jagayapeta art in the 2nd century. So the Ikshvaku art acted as the last flicker of the lamp of the great tradition of Satavahana art and started around 230 BC. The sculptural tradition of the Ikshvakus has its own history of development. So here, the point is that when you take the South Indian, the growth of South Indian art, architecture, sculpture, etc., we start from the times of Satavahanas. And when we are trying to understand the growth of Satavahanas, the Ikshvakus continued the splendor of art and architecture that was developed from the times of Satavahanas, and they carried on the flag and Ikshvakus also contributed for a kind of a sculptural tradition of their own, and a kind of historical development in the field of sculpture, in the field of art and architecture. But after that, there was some kind of a decline, and there wasn't probably a kind of a royal patronage, or probably the economy was not able to support the sculptural traditions. There can be various reasons for a kind of a decline that you find from the times of the Ikshvakus in the great sculptural tradition that was started from the Satavahana period. So the Ikshvakus have contributed to it, the Vishnu Kundins have contributed to it. So from the times of Satavahanas down to the times of Vishnu Kundins, you have great sculptural traditions coming down. And these sculptural traditions are defended by inscriptions that are available to us in different parts of the Krishna, Guntur, some parts of Telangana, and some areas in Maharashtra where we have found this inscription. They speak of a very great and interesting sculptural tradition belonging to this particular period. So when we examine the next point, that the initial phases, that is Virupa Veera Purushadatta's reign, the carvings displayed, carvings is the figures that are made out, on structures had less amount of stylization and were made in low relief, lacking vigor or mature Amravati tradition. Okay, so here it means that from the times of Veera Purushadatta's to the Amravati tradition, so they're taking 2 points. They're just speaking a kind of a development in the style of Ikshvaku culture, which is explained to us in some of the inscriptions that are available to us from Amravati. Similarly, some of the inscriptions of Veera Purushadatta, which we find during Veera Purushadatta. 1 minute, there is a kind of a jumping, and let me this. Veera Purushadatta, they were low relief, and the mature tradition of Amravati cannot be found. So the stupas also were plain and with absolutely anthropomorphic depiction of Buddha, and represented a symbolic forms such as wheel, feet, throne, and swastika. These are all some of the symbols which are associated with Buddha, and these are depicted in the Buddhist art that we find here in this particular period. So the next phase that we can take into consideration is a kind of a matured phase, I mean some kind of a development that we find it from the times of the later period, that is from the Amravati style. So the Amravati style represents a mature phase, in which you have sculptures having delicate poses and subtle expressions, that is giving importance to particular details. Okay, mostly the themes behind the depicted sculpture remain as Jatakas, such as Mandhatu Jataka, figures carved in round appear during the 11th regnal year of Yuhavula Kamtila, as found from the archaeological remains of a mutilated Buddha image found in an episcopal shrine from Site 9 at Nagarjunakonda. This is all some kind of a detail that, I mean, as I was trying to tell you, that the period of Ikshvakus was a period which depicts both the Buddhist tradition and the Vedic tradition. So the period of Yuhavula Kamtula, where you find him patronizing Buddhism, certain inscriptions that were available that are available in Nagarjunakonda, they depict the intricate designs of the lotus, etc., which are, and some of them depict the Jataka stories, the feet, the throne, the swastik mark. So when we're talking of such things, you speak of certain details of making them. So these details, they are not just cut out giving you an idea, but they're very carefully made, and the details of a wheel or a feet or a Buddha can be found or can be seen very clearly from the inscriptions and the sculptures that that are available at Nagarjunakonda Museum or other places from in Jaggayapeta or in Amaravati. Both Amaravati and Nagarjunakonda have a lot of arts and artifacts and sculptures and plates coming down from the times of Ikshvakus, certain coins also coming down from the Ikshvakus, from the times of Ikshvakus. So both places, Amaravati and Nagarjunakonda, have museums which give us a lot of information with regard to the development of art and architecture during the period of Ikshvakus. So then the next phase is the phase in the Ikshvaku art is the evidences which are found through the dating of a long panel found from the site of 546. Here when I say these are all certain evidences to say that there was a growth in the Ikshvaku art and architecture. So I have given you the details of the dating and the panel from where they're available and the period and the year also. Like for example, in this point, I'm trying to tell you that Ivavula Chatmula period, there is a site in called titled as 106 Nagarjunakonda, which is dating to the 24th year of reign of the popular king Ihavula Chamtula, and has intricate depictions of Mithuna figures. See, this is again a very interesting thing. So you have Mithuna figures and scenes from the life of Gautama Buddha. So this all shows a kind of a refinement, a growth in a growth in art and architecture during the period of the Ikshvakus. The points that I've picked up is to give you a complete idea that there was patronization, development, and these inscriptions give us an idea of the society where in the social conditions you can find that there was a kind of religious tolerance. There was both patronization of Buddhism and Vedic tradition, and these inscriptions give complete idea of the kind of human emotions and expressions that were there in that particular period, whether it was, and these emotions and expressions are very clearly visible on the sculptures where couples of, and there are several kinds of dwarf figures also. So it is a reflection of some kind of a contentment that was there, some kind of a prosperity that was there in the social conditions, some kind of a togetherness that was there in the social conditions. So the art and architecture, the patronization of art and architecture very clearly reflects the kind of social stability, social tolerance, which is very well defended by political stability and political growth. So generally, the art and architecture, painting, music, etc., are considered to be the finer aspects of mankind. And unless or until there is a kind of a political and social stability, there will not be any kind of a growth in the finer aspects of mankind. So during the period of Ikshvakus and Vishnu Kundins, we can find very clearly that along with political stability, there was also a kind of a social stability, as a result of which you have patronization of art and art forms, and growth of literature, growth of vernacular, growth of feudalism. You can find traces of urbanization, nascent urbanization along the Krishna River. So all this information we get from the inscriptions that are available during this particular period. Okay, so the next point that I'm trying to speak of is the secular tradition of the Ikshvakus, again coming from the mature phase, but having different contents in manifest in the battle scenes and depicted in the pillars. So the sculptures, they not only very delicately depict expressions of the Mithuna couples, they not only delicately express the expressions of the dwarf figures, but they also express the battle scenes. And such scenes are indicative that the capital city of Ikshvakus, that is Vijaypuri, did witness perils of war, which means that there was a kind of a war activity in that particular period, during the period of Ikshvakus. And Vijaypuri, the capital city of the Ikshvakus, was subjected to a kind of a war phase. So an important scene depicted on the memorial of the king Chamtula, showing the elephant with a rider, is a case of point. So when you just look at the inscriptions of the Ikshvakus, they are very clearly depicting the sculptures of Mithuna, the sculptures of dwarf figures, the sculptures of war scenes, elephants, which means that they maintained elephants during this particular period. And there was a war activity around the Vijaypuri south. So all this kind of a social history can be constructed during this particular period, during the period of Ikshvakus. So the inscriptional evidences become very important in understanding. Okay, so when we take up the next part, this is the part of Vishnu Kundins. In the first phase, we have just tried to see kind of social history connected to, or the kind of social history that developed based on the inscriptions that are available in the Krishna Godavari districts and parts of Nalgonda and Vijaypuri. And based on that, we have been able to construct the history of the Ikshvakus. Now, trying to get an idea of the Vishnu Kundins. All the records of the Vishnu Kundins and the kings prior to Madhavavarma II seem to be the patrons of Hinduism. So this is very clear. The beginnings of Vishnu Kundins, they had patronized Hinduism, and the art of Vishnu Kundins from the beginning, or from the original phase, was depicting the Vedic tradition, and they were great patrons of the religion Hinduism. From the time of accession of Madhavavarman II, okay, an aggressive self-assertion of the Vedic Brahmanism occurred. Elaborate Vedic ceremonies like Rajasuya, Purushameda, Sarvameda, and Ashwameda were performed and undertaken. The celebrations of these sacrifices represents the traditional spirit of the Brahmanical revival. Some of the rulers referred to themselves as Parama Maheshwaras. The inscription refers to their family deity, Sri Parvata Swami. So this clearly establishes that the Vishnu Kundins were had contributed to the revival of Hinduism, and the inscriptions and the art forms are basically from the times of Vishnu Kundin down to the times of Madhavavarman II. They depict some kind of sacrifices, they depict the traditional spirit and a kind of a Brahmanical revival, unlike the times of the Ikshvakus, where we find a kind of a kind of a patronizing between both the Hindu forms of art and Buddhist forms of art. The times of Vishnu Kundins, especially during the time of Madhavavarma and Madhavavarma II, there was an accession, there was a revival of the Brahmanical tradition. Okay, so the names of rulers like Madhavavarma, Govindavarma show that their Vaishnavite learnings, thus both Hindu sects of Shaivism and Vaishnavism, might have received equal patronage from them. So see here, why we have to take religion into consideration is because of the fact that religion in the ancient period acted as a cementing force, and religion was also used as a medium to express the social philosophy. So here, when we are trying to take the period of Vishnu Kundins, The religious social philosophy was, having two different ideas. One was Shaivism, the other one was Vaishnavism. Unlike when you take the times of Ikshvakus, there you find the religious social philosophy was based on Hinduism or the Vedic Dharma, and Buddhism or as the Buddhist art form. So the social philosophy, the study of religion becomes a very important factor, because basically it helps us to understand the way in which the society in that particular period was thinking and acting. So coming down to literature of the period of Vishnu Kundins, the Vishnu Kundins were also great patrons of learning. They established colleges of Vedic learning. Brahmins were encouraged by gifts and lands, and colleges were established for propagation of Vedic studies. So land grants is a part of feudal structure, and any kind of a service which gained recognition by the royal families, the land grants were given. This was a part of ancient feudalism. So the Brahmin community, which were great patrons of learning and Sanskrit and Vedic studies, were also encouraged with some kind of land grants in this particular period. So Indra Bhattarka established many schools for imparting education on Vedic literature. So Vedic literature was given a lot of importance, and performance of several Vedic elaborate ceremonies by Madhava Varma is an evidence of the faith of the rulers. So here Vishnu Kundins had encouraged the Vedic ceremonies, so they were more, they leaned more towards Vedic ceremonies, Hinduism and Brahmanism, and the people were encouraged to take up these studies, because we find that even schools were established for this order, colleges were established for this order. So some of the Vishnu Kundin kings were credited with the authorship of several books. Like, for example, Vikramadeva Varma was described as a Mahakavi, great poet in a record. Further, an incomplete work of Sanskrit poets called Janasarya Chando Vichiti was attributed to Madhava Varma IV, who bore the title of Janasarya. Sanskrit enjoyed royal patronage. So Sanskrit-based works and Sanskrit-based literature had attained a lot of importance during the period of Vishnu Kundins. Here I am showing you some of the caves that belong to the period of Vishnu Kundins. Here at Undavalli, this was a rock-cut cave. We can see very clearly it's a cave that is engraved from a mountain. And this was built by Vishnu Kundins. And here you also have some kind of coins belonging to the Vishnu Kundin Empire. And they were available in Vidarbha or Maharashtra, which clearly established 2-3 points: that the empire extended up to Maharashtra, that there were trade links up to the borders of Maharashtra. So all these kind of ideas or points of understanding about the Vishnu Kundins can be very clearly established from the arts and artifacts that are available from the times of Vishnu Kundins. Here, again, I'm showing you sculptures of monks at Undavalli caves. Again, the same area where you can see, as I was telling you, the beard, you can see the details and the kind of beads that are there on the hand and the kind of a vessel that he's carrying. A lot of details and intricate designing, which speaks of a very highly advanced sculptural patterns during the time of the Vishnu Kundins. So the next point that I'm trying to show you is the being great devotees of Shiva. The Vishnu Kundins seem to have been responsible for the construction of number of cave temples dedicated to Shiva. So here, during the period of the Vishnu Kundins, you find Shaivism and Vaishnavism. And here you find Shaivism gaining a little advantage over Vaishnavism. Okay, so again, when you take the structures of Bezavada or Vijayawada, present-day Vijayawada, the cave structures again speak of this. Similarly, the Mogara Rajapuram, Undavalli caves, and Bhairavikonda are all dedicated to this particular period. Though some of these cave temples are attributed to the Pallava Mahadeva Varman I, the embers found on the caves and the areas being under the rule of Vishnu Kundins during this period clearly shows that these are the contributions of the Vishnu Kundins. So slight controversy with regarding to authorship, but finally we can come to a conclusion that this particular period and these areas were the areas of the Vishnu Kundins. So the art and architecture form very clearly depicts the Vishnu Kundins. Okay, so the next point that we can take into consideration, that is the big 4-storied cave at Undavali and the 8 cave temples in Bhairavikonda in Nellore district clearly show, however, resemblance with architecture of Pallava Mahendravarman's period. So there is some kind of linkages between the Pallavas and the Vishnu Kundins, and here this comes out very clearly from the Nellore district, Bhairavakonda, where you can find some kind of what do you say, presentation or linkages between the Vishnu, the Pallavas, etc. So here, when we are trying to understand why art and architecture literature plays an important role, is because it helps us to understand social philosophy, it helps us to understand economy, it helps us to understand the kind of different patronages, like for example, literature, education, social conditions, social relations. So all these ideas get reflected in the art forms. So the study of art and architecture of a given period tends to be very important in trying to get an understanding of the cultural advancement, the social stability, and a reflection of the social philosophy of the then contemporary times. We will continue in the next class with a different topic. Thank you.